Hello everybody, I'm Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where every episode I discuss a new topic of workplace culture and provide some insights and some practical things for you to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe and to share with people who you may think would be interested. Okay, let's get on with today's episode. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Culture and Coffee podcast. Now, in the past I've always said that I've always invited people to submit ideas for episodes, so I'm delighted to say that I've had one. Earlier this year I talked about the alignment between culture and strategy, and I talked about the kind of mismatch in time spent between the two, but had a request to say, can I talk a little bit more about strategy and how you can avoid strategy actually killing culture? So in today's session, I'm going to talk about how bad strategy can kill culture, but I'm going to focus on the positive. I'm going to talk about what good strategy looks like in order to make sure that you create the conditions for culture. Now, people are always familiar with the Peter Drucker quote, culture can eat strategy for breakfast. I like what Daniel Ek said. Daniel Ek is the CEO of Spotify. He said, some people say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's bullshit. He said great companies have both. And I 100% agree. 100% agree. In fact, my biggest client has great strategy and great culture. They really, really do. And that's because they spend time creating great strategy and then they spend time creating great culture to deliver the strategy. But where many organizations make the mistake is that they spend a lot of time creating strategy, but they kind of almost take their eye off it almost immediately. And some don't even review it throughout the year, and then they wonder why they never achieve their target. So let me start a little bit. And I talk about strategy extensively in DETOX Your Culture. If you haven't got a copy, it's out now. Because for me, it's one of the key foundational stones. And people always say, well, do we do strategy first or culture first? Well, I always say, well, if you know what your strategy is, you can create a really good culture to deliver your strategy. But if you've got a really bad strategy, then bad culture, then start there. Because actually, if you have a really good culture, it can help you revise and refine and improve your strategy. So what we know from research is that if you have a good strategy, well, you've got increased profitability because effective strategies can lead to kind of higher returns on investment and generate improved profit margins. You can enhance your market position. You can enhance your organizational reputation. You're better at managing risk, and that's kind of proactively managing risk. And that it's not just about mitigating the negative stuff that happens, but also being able to spot the positives as well. And part of that is culture. I'll maybe talk a little bit about that. But also you get, higher employee productivity, providing that you take this really great strategy and use it to build and define a really great culture. I'll come back to that in a second. But kind of in researching for the podcast, what I found was, and this was in Harvard Business Review, most businesses only ever deliver 50 to 60% in terms of financial performance that they promise in their strategy. 90% of organizations just kind of fail to execute their strategy altogether. And 95% of employees are often unaware of what companies' strategic intent is. And for me, that was one of the big issues as a former employee myself. And indeed, as a senior leader, it was something that I looked to change. Now, partly I use my personality as an excuse, because I think often what we send out to employees and what I see companies sending out to employees is really, really complex documentation. No one ever really does the work to make things simple to understand. And instead what they focus on is this cascading approach. how do we turn strategy into someone's key performance indicators? Actually, and what the great cultures do is they don't focus on the individual, they focus on the team. Again, something I wrote about in both in Culture Fix and in Detox Your Culture was having a focus on team goals. So using things like objective key results, because that's when you get this sense of togetherness, this sense of belonging, the sense of ownership around the actual goals. So what the strategy should outline, and I'll come back to the four things that great strategy should have. What it should outline is what are the goals that we're aiming for. Now, ultimately, what great strategy does is it ties back to a vision. So that's the starting place. So whenever I speak to leadership teams, I've got a couple of meetings this week actually with leadership teams. And the first thing that I say to them is, what's your vision? And sometimes it's way too long, it's way too complex. It's a mix of a vision statement and a purpose. And so there has to be some refinement of the vision to make sure that it kind of inspires people and it really lights a fire. And it's one of those things that's achievable. For a vision to be believable, it has to be achievable. So what does the vision look like? And then what's the strategy that we need to create to deliver the vision? Now, most strategies these days are between 3 and 5 years. Between 3 and 5 years. But I don't see any 1-year strategies. Sometimes there's a kind of an update in business planning to a 3-year strategy. One of the leadership teams I'm meeting with this week, they have a 5-year growth strategy. And the other one has a 3-year strategy. I did some preparation for those meetings earlier today. So they tend to be between 3 and 5 years. But there has to be a recognition that some flexibility has to be baked in because things are going to change. The technology is changing, every kind of 9 to 12 months at the minute. And it doesn't matter whether you're a sports team, it doesn't matter whether you're a technology company yourself, or maybe you're an FMCG company. You need to be constantly looking at your market, constantly looking at your competitors, constantly looking at the growth plans that you've got and saying, well, are we in line to achieve what we expected to achieve? And if not, what do we need to change? And this is where I talked about this in Culture Fix. The quarterly business reviews, are really, really useful. So what are the 4 things? For me, good strategy asks 4 questions. So where are we now? What does the business look like? What's our landscape? Where have we come from? But at this moment in time, where are we now? And what that does is it kind of tells a story of what's got us to this point. And, almost then to provide really good context of what we're looking to do, what we're looking to achieve. And certainly for good strategy, when I read about where we are now, I get a sense of why we need to do what we need to do, which is the next bit. So the first thing is, where are we now? The second thing is, where are we going? So what does that growth strategy look like? Now, when I say growth, I don't necessarily mean financial growth. It could be a positional strategy. It could be, if you're a government agency, it could be delivering key strategic promises that were made by ministers. It doesn't necessarily need to be financial. For most, it's financial. Even, like football team, I'm meeting a couple of football teams recently, is, even for those guys, yes, strategically as a business, you need to make money. It's still a business. You need to make money. And of course, you've got different stakeholders to serve, but it's still about making money to free up capital to do the things that you really need to do to grow further. So where are we going is it's partly a mix of the vision, but also that thinking of, what can we become? And for me, this is where it starts to get exciting. So when I read the where are we going at the end of this, and I used to say this, as an employee, I really want to get a sense at the strategy. I want to get that. Here's where we are. All right. I get that. See that. Yeah. Done that. Tick that one off. But also here's where we're going. And at the end of that, I should be fired up. I should want to read, well, what are we going to do? So that's the next thing is, kind of how will we get there? What are the projects that we're going to undertake? And there's some high level thinking that's gone into those. And this is where, when you're building a strategy, for me, the where are we going really is generally led by boards. It's generally led by the executive team with a few layers, but maybe one layer below that. But as soon as we get to how will we get there, this is where we're engaging more and more of our employees to get them thinking about opportunities, to get them thinking about challenges that we have right now, to get them thinking about enhancements, improvements, tweaks to the way that we do things. This is where we maybe send them on field trips to look at what our competitors are doing or to be inspired by other people in other businesses. To really then come up with, a really good project mix. Because your projects really are the things that you undertake that enhance the way that you do things, or they're the business changes that we need to make. And so part of that might be a change in culture. Part of that might be a change in operating model. And the two are different. The operating model is very much how the business runs itself day to day, and the culture is how that happens. So in the operating model, there might be a structure. So, kind of what does if you use a hierarchy or maybe it's a flat structure, what does that look like? What are the roles? What are the responsibilities? What are we going to pay people? What's our expense policy? That's your operating model. Where the culture is, it really centers around behavior, collaboration, innovation, personality, communication, values, those kinds of things. So they're very different. And if you change, as I mentioned before, if you change the operating model, it doesn't change the culture. You have to do other work to actually change the culture. Once you've made a change to the operating model. So, kind of how will we get there? This is about the project mix, the things that you need to change, and it might involve an operating model or a culture change. And so we're starting to think about those things, because really what the strategy will outline is where we're going to put our money. What are we going to spend it on? And there's usually a bit of I was nearly said a fight. It's not a fight. So actually in some companies it probably is a fight. It's a conversation about, what's the most important thing? And often I've been involved with organizations, probably because of my kind of fairly direct style, to help them with their prioritization at this point. The how will we get there? Most organizations I've worked with, they do way too much stuff. And so they never ever get there because they're just overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that they've actually got strategically to deliver. And they don't have the money and they don't have the people, but they still put it on the plan to do. It's absolute nonsense. And so what you want to get to with the how will we get there is a bit of a 1 to 50, 1 to 100 of initiatives that we're going to undertake. And then we're going to use really good workforce planning, again, which is a feed into the strategy, to look at our people mix and say, okay, well, what do we have the capacity for? What can we feasibly deliver? And at that point, we can get a sense of what we can actually get done within our strategic window. And then our quarterly business reviews that we do every 3 months, we kind of look at our strategy, we look at our workforce plan, we look at our budget, and we say, right, what have we done? What's left to do? What can we do? Right. And then the fourth element, so we've got where are we now? Where are we going? How will we get there? And then the fourth element is how will we know when we're there? And so this is all about targets and measures. And so this is the bit that organizations tend to focus a lot of time and effort on is, and often it's linked to bonus, which is part of the operating model, linked to bonus. To sort of say, well, if you get there, this team gets this money, or this manager gets this money, or else we tick it off as something that we've done, and that's great. And so this is where we'll look at high level timescales, and we'll say, yes, we can do it in the strategic window, or we expect it to straddle strategic windows. And for me, what the best organizations do is they really concentrate on a good mix of short, medium, and long term. The long-term stuff usually gives you the greatest gains. The short-term stuff generally fixes stuff that's broken right now. And the medium term is the stuff that you kind of keep your eye on. And this is often risk mitigation work, is what's the thing that could trip us up. And we just need to make sure that we're doing kind of little and often over the medium term. But how will we get there is the measures. And there was an audit board report last year. Again, I use this in Detox Your Culture. And what that said was 55% of businesses struggle to effectively track the key performance indicators. And yet when you think about how much time is wasted on these KPIs, key performance indicators, it's kind of shocking that organizations don't really know where they are. And so this is what good strategy looks like. Now, as I said, once it's been created, that's the start, but then it needs to be regularly reviewed. And then good decisions need to be made in line with the strategy, which is also in line with the vision. And this is how you become a vision-led organization. Or if you don't have a vision and you're using the purpose, this is how you become a purpose-led organizations. But 3/4 of business leaders find it really, really difficult to adapt their strategy quickly. And so this is something I talked about pre-COVID. So 2019 with the rise of agility. And so before we were talking about AI, we were talking about kind of business agility. And if you don't have a good strategy, you can never really have agility. But then if you have a good strategy, but you don't have a process to regularly review it, or the initiatives don't line up to the vision or the purpose, whichever you're trying to use, then you're never going to have that flexibility. Your decision making is going to be really slow, really labored. Often what happens is we go with who shouts loudest rather than what's the most important thing that we need to do. This is where sunk cost bias plays a role. We start something, let's say we spend 50,000, and because we've already spent the money, we just keep spending it, even if it's a really dumb thing to do. And then we get to the end of it. One of my jobs when I was working for New Zealand government, when I joined, they'd invested almost $1 million. It was $920,000 in a tool. And it was my job then to the previous person who was in the role had been made redundant, and it was my job to pick it up and make it successful. Anyway, it was one of those classic consulting sales. And for anyone who's ever done one of these, you know what I mean, where they sell you something vanilla. So here's what it looks like out of the box, literally. But then the cost of the enhancements that you need to make it practical for your business is almost double. And so we'd spent, just over almost $1 million. And then I was asked to pick it up. And so I undertook a review of where we were at. And I looked at the functionality that we needed in order to make it workable for the business that we were in. And I got a quote, and I got 3 quotes, as you're supposed to do, 1 from the existing company and then 2 from others. And essentially it was going to cost the same again to get the enhancements that we needed. And even then I wasn't sure, or I couldn't be certain, that it was better, believe this or not, better than using spreadsheets and a tool that we already had. And so I wrote it off. Because that was the right thing to do. There was just no way I was going to throw good money after bad. And yet, people were shocked. They were like, that's not what we do. Now, I'd come from the private sector where you don't waste any money. I remember we had a project capex of 55 million. We only spent 53, and then we were only given 52 the following year, because we proved that we could only spend 53. And so you don't waste any money. And so people were shocked. It's like, and the company that had provided it couldn't believe that we weren't completing the project, but also, of course, couldn't believe that they weren't going to get another $1 million off us. So I think that's what good strategy does. It informs whether you make a good decision on things like that. So, for example, that 900,000 we were able to spend on other initiatives to really help our business develop and grow, and that was money that we actually gave back. Southwest Airlines are a great case study for strategy. If anyone ever read up on Southwest Airlines. So their original plan, Southwest Airlines, was to kind of create an airline equivalent of the Greyhound bus. It's a really interesting story. So what they wanted was for it to be easier to get around than Greyhound, but obviously, kind of really wanted to manage the cost. So even though they knew it was going to be more expensive, they wanted to try and minimize it as much as they possibly can. So they decided that they were only going to fly a certain type of aircraft. So it was easier to train pilots and easier to maintain because you didn't have to train them on all these different kinds of planes. That they were not going to offer meals. They were just going to focus on all we do is fly you from point A to point B. They were going to specialize just in short flights. So we're not going to do long haul. We're not going to fly to Australia. We're not going to fly to the UK. We're just going to fly short flights in the US. And you could only book online. And so strategically, that was very much about kind of where are we going and how will we get there? Where are we going? Well, we want to be the Greyhound equivalent airline. And how are we going to get there? And then all of those things that I just mentioned was how I was going to get there. And of course, how do we know when we're there? We're going to keep measuring, kind of ticket sales, customer feedback, all of these kinds of things. So they're a really great example of strategy. Nissan, not so great example of strategy under Carlos Ghosn, which really concentrated power and decision-making at the top. And it took it away from the actual people on the coalface day to day and consequently just turned into a toxic mess. So good strategy, it's like a sat nav for your business. Good strategy provides that pathway to success, and culture then is the vehicle to actually get you there. Culture brings good strategy to life. Culture makes strategy a reality. And so this is why good strategy is really important, because if you have bad strategy, it leads to bad decisions. It leads to bad culture. Ultimately, people can't see and navigate the way forward. And the business never ever grows and either ends up kind of failing, has to be restructured, or ends up being taken over by someone else because they just didn't do enough to create the clarity required to light a fire inside people, to give them the tools to create a good culture, to deliver continual success. All right, hope you enjoyed today's session. Ta-ra for now.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com.